Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. I'm Jess, and I'm here with Chief Sutterby with the Spring Hill Police Department in Kansas. Over 35 years in law enforcement. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Jess, for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about when you think back to the beginning of your career. What was it about law enforcement that really called you to this profession?
I've always had a faith has always been a big part of my personal life. And so one of the things that really drew me into law enforcement was the opportunity to serve other people and to be part of something that's bigger than yourself. And when I think about my faith and what that means in trying to help other people through difficult times, I actually, when I was young, wanted to be a mortician. And some people may think, well, that's kind of a weird way to circle back around to policing. But if you think about being a mortician and having a funeral home, it was a way to meet people in their most difficult times or challenges in life. And then when I was working at a library when I was in high school, I met a person whose husband was going through the process with Kansas Highway Patrol. And he started talking to me about his experiences and went on a ride along, and that hooked me. I knew that basically that was what God had in store for me. And so I really feel like law enforcement has been a calling from above and something that I was always designed and purposed for. And that's how I entered the field of policing.
To your point, it does kind of go hand in hand with talking to someone on one of their bad days. With if you were thinking about mortician and now like you're going in and really having to have that empathy for someone when they're going through a difficult time and being there for your community.
Yeah, I mean it's something if you think about it, pastors and police officers are very similar in how they serve because again, pastors are there. Yes, they have a specific flock or congregation that they shepherd through all facets of life. And if you think about policing, we shepherd, we guide, we direct people on a daily basis. And sometimes we miss that connection as officers. But it is something that as I have gone along in my life and looked at my journey and how I started exploring chaplaincy it's really parallels pastors because we meet people in their most desperate times and then we try to help them as best as we can from all different perspectives, and sometimes that leads into a spiritual perspective of why things or how things can happen to us.
At what point in your career did you decide you wanted to pursue that degree in chaplaincy?
It was 2014. I had the opportunity to really get involved in, well, I'll back up just a little bit and say I felt like ministry was always going to be, or some sort of ministry was always going to occur after law enforcement. And when I got the opportunity in 2014 to um, lead the chaplains program at the Overland Park, Kansas Police Department, which is where I spent a majority of my career before coming to Spring Hill, Kansas. I got the chance to really lead that program, and we were able to really uh, feed into chaplaincy as more than just pastors who show up to give a ceremonial opening prayer or a closing prayer at a promotion ceremony um, or at some other kind of celebration, but how to really use that to feed into the officers being well spiritually, because it's proven through research that faith and our faith does play a part in how we police people, because chaplaincy is about how we care for people. And when we're policing, we're caring for people, and we're caring for people when they're arrested, we're caring for people when they're in need, when we're just interacting with them. So how do we best care for people? And I think that's where chaplaincy really starts to make its impact on making sure that, officers are well enough to do that very thing.
And how do you care for people? And this might be one of on a tougher day when someone's at a really low point and they're not their best selves. How do you show up and care in that way?
I think it's just showing, that at that very moment, that person's uh, the most important priority for you. And then how do we provide resources in a sense for that person? And that may be just like, how do we get a hold of their pastor? Do they have a faith or a belief, and what is that, and do they want us to get that person involved to provide support? How do we make those calls for family to just take over um, for us, have them coming in to support that person who's maybe doesn't feel like they can make those calls, doesn't feel like they can even pick up the phone to, start that process. How do we help with funeral arrangements? How do we help? And these are things that chaplains can do that take the load off of police officers, who are really, their role is to investigate what occurred. Did a crime occur? Did it not occur? Is this suspicious? Is it not suspicious? Those are things the officers are really trained to handle when it comes to trauma and tragedy. These are things where our mental health professionals can be of assistance, but also this is where chaplains can step in and take on that role and really focus on the person who suffered um, a situation that they never really thought that they'd find themselves into, in order so that we can still do our jobs.
This is a great point too, because a lot of times when we talk about wellness, we think of physical and mental. This is adding the spiritual aspect, which is also equally important to officer wellness because of
Sure.
everything that you're dealing with on the basis. So how have you added that into your department?
So I mean, so you're correct in the sense our chaplains, um, we really encourage them to live life with the officers. And the only way you can live life with the officers is to start building relationships. Well, how do we build relationships? That means you have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And cops can be very cynical.
Yeah.
That's not going to strike anybody as some kind of a big epiphany. But what it does is we have to remind our chaplains, hey, if you want to have these conversations with officers that can really impact them in a positive way, you need to start building that relationship, building that trust. And the only way you can do that is come in for ride-alongs, show up at roll call, start integrating yourself into the daily life of the officer so that they just see you as another aspect of the job. It's not so much, oh, the chaplain's here. I can't cuss today because I'm going to offend the chaplain. And we have to, as chaplains, we have to oversee some of these things. We have to, overlook, I should say, some of these things that happen, and just, again, we have to integrate ourselves as chaplains just as much as the officer has to allow us to be included in their life in order to, really start to make headways into talking about things that affect officers, personal relationships, you know, with their girlfriends or husbands or spouses or boyfriends or whatever relationship they find themselves in. Maybe they're struggling in that. We know that divorce is a huge problem in law enforcement. Maybe they're suffering from something they saw that they never ever got the chance to deal with. And this could be the opportunity for the chaplain to really speak into that once the officer feels comfortable enough to say, hey, why do bad things happen to good people? Why, how do I rationalize this in my life? Or maybe some of the guilt that they may have from, a situation that occurred where one officer got hurt and they didn't. So there's these kind of things that can start to chip away, and we can start addressing, which again, when an officer is well in their inner being, that's going to translate to how they treat people on the street.
Yeah. And one of the things that you say is wellness has to address the whole person. And I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, one of the things we tried to do to incorporate our chaplains even more is to have them teach something that they're very familiar with. And again, what a great way for them to get up in front of the officers, for the officers to get to know them, and for them to really be seen as, oh, here's this officer, this chaplain cares enough that, they're willing to get up in front of us and teach a class on how do you deliver a death notification. We had a chaplain that was certified as a financial peace instructor. So we had this class offered to our officers where they could take it as a couple, and the department would pay for it. And the chaplain actually led a group of five couples through the Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. So there's ways to integrate chaplaincy beyond just a spiritual context, but there's ways that they can actually speak into situations that will help train officers to um, dealing with death, dealing with trauma, or just in their personal lives. How do I deal with financial issues? How do I deal with my personal relationships? And that helps to build that trust that gets the chaplains into the opportunity to be able to speak on these things.
So important to have a well-rounded and not just, one area and then missing in another area. It sounds like you have that covered.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's super important for us to be able to, again, it's got to be something that um, is integrated as just a part of your wellness program. It's
Right.
just another facet of,
Mm-hmm.
what we offer to be able to, address things that officers may be struggling with.
Mm-hmm. The spiritual side isn't for everybody. How do you get buy-in from your team if maybe they're not, has that been an issue for you at all? Any kind of buy-in?
So I think one of the great things that's occurred recently is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which I think your listeners know is, the body of people who help to design policy,
Mm-hmm.
policing, help to determine what best practices are in our profession, and try to push and support current issues that may be in front of the legislatures, both at different state levels and at federal levels, has recently endorsed and come out and created a resolution that is hopefully helping chiefs um, start to form and see that chaplain programs are accepted. It's not a issue between, some chiefs may be shy about, getting involved or having a chaplain's program because all of a sudden it's going to create some kind of state separation of state and issue with religion and beliefs. And that's just not the case. Chaplaincy is a ministry of presence. It's not about proselytizing or sharing your faith. Sure enough, if the officer or someone asks about a particular faith and has questions, uh, you know they're not to shy away from that or say they can't talk about it. But really, it's about living life and speaking into what can help an officer feel well, and how does that spiritual component feed into their overall wellness. And that's really what it's about. So with the ICP coming out and helping to endorse chaplaincy, and in our chaplains section of ICP, we've really been active recently in trying to develop training that would be standardized for chaplaincy across law enforcement. And having, maybe endorsing organizations that can provide that type of training to organizations and to their chaplains so that, it's consistent across the board. We've also been working on how do we help a chief who doesn't have a chaplain's program now and integrate these into the organization so that they can bring this component and feel comfortable about having a program like this in their department. So I think with the International Association of Chiefs of Police supporting this, that removes, I feel like, a big barrier to people who may be a little bit more uncomfortable with it than others across the country.
You had mentioned too that they're not only, they're doing the ride alongs. I like the phrase that you said, live life with the officers. So they're really not only focused on one area, they're bringing in some financial aspects and speaking on different topics. I think that also helps weave it in and provide some consistency as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we want to do is one of the chaplains that I worked with at Overland Park, he was took these things and really integrated himself in. He was asked by one of our officers to do his wedding. And so, when to have an officer ask you to officiate something that significant in your life, that is a huge compliment to the chaplain, but also it speaks volumes to how that chaplain came in and integrated himself into the organization. This same chaplain had responded on a death notification to a family, and the family reached back out to him to do their celebration of life because they didn't have anybody who they could turn to, or they didn't have anybody that was easily someone that they thought they felt comfortable with doing this for them and their family. So, here we are, the chaplains now, coordinating and working with this family on, a celebration of life. So, chaplains programs are made up of many different faiths. So we're not just talking about, obviously the main faith in the United States is Christianity, Catholicism, but I mean, when I was with Overland Park, we had a Buddhist priest, we had a uh, Islamic now I forget the term, the official term for their religious leader, but we had somebody from the Islamic faith, Muslim faith. We had somebody from Christianity. We had a couple of Catholic deacons. So we had a very diverse group of um, faith leaders who could be called upon, and they reflected the community that we served. And so that's also a big part of it is how do you bring in faith leaders from different faiths in order to address, the community that you serve, and it should be reflective of who's in your community.
Yeah. And spiritual wellness can mean a lot of different things. How would you define it within law enforcement?
I think spiritual wellness within law enforcement is that you have a healthy way of keeping life in perspective. Um, and that can be difficult without faith because I think the one thing that like spirituality gives you is hope. And you know, hope is so important for people. Um, you know, it is something that can be the difference between, we hear about officers who, lose hope and commit suicide. And so if you lose that hope in life, it can really change your perspective on how you see what your options are.
Right.
So chapel, spiritual wellness is about giving people hope and keeping, challenges of life in perspective and how we have options to get through these challenges in life.
I like how you said that because it is about the hope and the perspective. You just you sometimes are so zoomed in to a situation, and this can be for anybody really, you're just zoomed in and you're not seeing the full picture. And sometimes you need to take a moment to yourself, step back, and then see that full picture.
Yeah, we're not talking about telling people, well,
Yeah,
somebody else has it worse than
right.
you, so keep this in
Mhm.
perspective. No, these things are, every person has, all of us have challenges
Yeah,
in our life. So how can we best wade through these challenges? And again, these four components of being, our physical, our mental, our financial, our spiritual health, these are all spirituality is one component. Our physical health is important to reduce stress and have an outlet for, to release that kind of stress. Obviously, our mental health co-responders and workers do a great job of keeping, the proper mindset. And I think spiritual fitness feeds right into that mental health component. They're different, but very similar in what they're trying to do. And they each have different resources where we may be drawing from a mental perspective. There's one place to draw those resources, but really from a faith perspective, for instance, if you believe in the Bible, you may be pointed back to that and some of the things that are in the book of the Bible to provide hope in certain circumstances that you find yourself in.
right. That's very interesting perspective on all of that. You've spent years watching officers experience trauma and loss. What happens when someone does feel like they've lost their sense of hope or their sense of purpose? What advice do you give them?
Well, I think um, we have to really remind people of what their purpose is, what they were called to do. And I think sometimes when we lose hope, we lose purpose. And we forget that, you know, we that we have impact on people around us. Because we tend to forget that people care about us when we lose hope, when we lose kind of this perspective of what's going on, and our decisions, have an impact on the people around us. And so, how do we remind people that you're cared about, that you're loved, and these are difficult conversations to have because guess what? Officers don't want to be vulnerable in this way because we've been trained not to be vulnerable in certain situations. So, but that's what the chaplains and that's what the spiritual component is how do you help people through a very vulnerable time where they do feel a little bit insecure, they feel a little bit where they've lost a sense of who they are, and how do we remind them of that you are important, that you do matter, that you're loved, and that there's people around you that do care about you. And because I think when you're feeling you've forgotten all that perspective. You just get that, like you said, you get very tunnel vision on what your situation is, and that causes you to forget about your purpose.
That's like, I think any human, and you do something wrong, or not even that you do something wrong, it just goes a different way than you had thought it was going to go. And you're in your head after the fact, just thinking, like, I could have done this, I should have done this, all of the things that you're thinking now. And I think in your profession, it's even like at another level of feeling those feelings. And how do you get past that?
And I think one of the things that I think it happens to everybody, I think it happens from police officers to chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I've really focused on as I've gotten later on um, in my career is trying to be support for executive leaders because there's self-doubt, there's second guessing. Could I have made a better decision here? And so how do you help even executives maintain their level of focus and their level of confidence? And I think some of that comes from just, the spiritual perspective of, trust in the process, trust in what you've known has been successful in getting you to the point where you're at, and not forgetting um, those kind of things to where you start to, doubt your abilities and your skills to lead an organization. And it's the same thing with officers. You're trying to make sure that they have the tools they need to go out and do their job in a very effective way. And if you're not well, you can't care for those who you've been put in charge of. So we got to really make sure our officers are well when they go out of the station, to make sure that they can care for people in our communities the right way.
Thank you. And then you talk about the four pillars. You want to share?
So yeah, so the four pillars that I like to really hone in on are purpose, impact, care, and joy. And these are the things that I talk about with the officers that are here at Spring Hill. And that is, we've got to, part of this is from a spiritual perspective is we have a purpose. Our purpose is really whatever your department's mission statement is, that's your purpose. For here at Spring Hill, it's to serve with integrity, ensure public safety, protect the most vulnerable, and make Spring Hill a great place to live. So how do we go out each day? How do we come in and remind us that's our purpose, is to go out there and serve other people, and that we've been called to do that. Second is, how do we impact somebody each day in a positive way? How can I take away a win each day from how I go out and serve? And we can generate those things on our own. We don't have to just have, wait for that call to come out and then, hope that somebody recognizes that I made an impact. No, how do we go out within our purpose to really make an impact on people? And I think that nourishes the soul. When we go out and we do something that we know change somebody's life for that day, no matter how big or how small that is, we can take away that win. And I feel like it nourishes our soul, reinforces our purpose, and gets us ready to come back and do it all over again the next day. Care is an essential part of just what we do. And again, it's caring for people in every aspect of policing, whether that's community engagement, community policing, traffic enforcement, going to the domestic disturbance and taking enforcement action. How do we treat people day in and day out? Do we treat them with care? Do we treat them with respect and with dignity, no matter what it is? Again, I think these things, how our heart is how we treat people. And so we have to make sure that our heart's in the right place. And that is, again, goes back purpose, how we're making an impact, goes into how we care. And then I think it's about having fun in the job. Yes, the job is fun, but it's a serious business. It's life or death in a lot of aspects. But also, we got into this profession because we enjoy helping people. And so, you know, we have to keep that in perspective. And again, I think these four pillars, I'll get back to again to say, I believe these things are what nourish our soul, what keeps us um, striving to do what we were called to do.
And again, I feel like everybody, no matter what their profession is, they want to have a purpose. It's, we're here to make an impact in the world.
Yes.
Are you able, and we hear so many, tragic stories, there's those things that happen, but what's something that happened where you were able to do something that made you feel really good and where you were like, this is why I do what I do every day?
I think there's been several moments in my career, and some of them I just know about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the majority of the things that we do, whether no matter what, like you said, what profession you're in, you knew that you made a difference that day. And I think, one of the moments was, just um it was a call where we went to a crash scene. I was just talking about this the other day where a couple of teenagers were coming back from the movies, and they were uh, son and or brother and sister. Brother was driving and was in he had a very fast vehicle, and he was, out of character, just decided with his little sister in the car to speed and lost control, jumped the center median, and head-on collision occurred, severely injuring the little girl, but killing the brother, that killing the driver. And I just remember, you know, I just remember trying to. This was at a time where when social media was just starting to become really something you had to pay attention to, and we were trying to figure out who the young man was, and we wanted to get to his parents and deliver that notification before they found out on social media, and we didn't make it. We couldn't do it fast enough, and the mother showed up on scene of the crash. And I just remember her going down to her knees and weeping uncontrollably. And I just remember, in a very, this wasn't something that was ever taught to me, but just putting my arm around mom and just trying to provide some sense of comfort during this just tragedy. Whether or not somebody made a mistake, still a tragedy doesn't take away from that fact. And I just remember walking away from it saying, just remembering I did my best to comfort, to console, and to, show her that we cared, we cared. Um, I hope. I don't know. She never gave me any feedback. I never received any kind of letter or note from her, but I just know that I knew that I did um, what I could do that day, and I took away, that sense of service, that sense of honor, for being there in that moment and just showing kindness. Um, And I think that's what we can do a lot of times. And sometimes we don't feel like we can put our arm around somebody. Sometimes we don't feel like we can be that vulnerable in a situation. I do think this generation of officer is better at this than my generation was. I think we've learned a lot of how to deal with people and how to, address, people's tragedies. And so, that's one thing that I do see that has improved in our profession.
For me personally, some of the best gifts I've received have been, that a hug in a moment where I felt like I just needed someone, or a conversation, someone just to listen to what I needed to say. And so I feel like those small things that may not feel like they're so much to you, they mean so much to the other person.
Again, that's what chaplains, I'll reiterate this. This is what you said is the essence of chaplaincy. It's being present in someone's moment of tragedy or challenge, and just being there to listen, being there to help out, being there to do whatever is needed. Or to just hug somebody and say, you know what, I'm here for you. And that's the same with the officer. It doesn't matter as a chaplain whether it's, officer wellness, or whether it's a community wellness thing. It's again, it's that relationship that is going to help make the department and the organization stronger, because you're going to have more resilient people in the organization that doesn't mean that, it gets any easier. It just means that they know how to, traverse these kinds of tragedies and bounce back in order so that they can help the next person.
I don't know if I told you, but prior to working with first responders, I worked with a more vulnerable population, domestic violence survivors, sex trafficked children,
Hmm.
things like that. And some of the things that they had said to me was, I just wish my parents would have read to me like you do, or I wish that I would have had someone to listen to me when I was growing up. So again, it just goes back to those very simple things and let people know that they do have a purpose and
Yeah.
inspire and encourage people.
Inspire and encourage, and yeah, and listen is a big thing. And I think just like being able to be a little bit vulnerable. It's uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
for some, but again, that's where that aspect of with the officers and with chaplaincy, it's where that trust really plays a big role because I feel like officers will feel like being vulnerable once they trust the chaplain has their best interest, and they're not going to share. The confidentiality aspect obviously is a huge part of it too, is ensuring that there's confidentiality, and there's protections for both the chaplain and the officer when they're in the car together, as long as it's not life or death kind of situation where you have a danger to oneself or others. These things are confidential in nature, and will remain between the chaplain and the police officer or the community members. So
Thank you so much for sharing. I have one final question for you, and that is, what are your words of wisdom for the future generations?
I think what I would share is that don't make law enforcement your identity, because you're so much more than a police officer. You're a father, a mother, a sister, a brother, an aunt, an uncle. And I feel like, those who have made law enforcement their identity lose their self within the process of the journey. And sometimes that's led to the journey being cut short. And so if you can remember that being a police officer is just something that I do, but my real purpose is to, help others. That's really where I'm trying to make an impact and care for people. I think that'll lead to a more happy and a longer career, and a more healthy career in that.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate you being on here and sharing your words of wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me.